Today is Sunday, April 22nd, and my name is Kathy Gaw, and I have the honor of interviewing Dr. Jane Woodrow. And Jane has a lot of experience both with the Ohio Psychological Association as well as the Ohio Licensing Board, and things that the Ethics Committee, the Ohio Psychological Association Ethics Committee did in conjunction to what the Licensing Board did. And also being able to talk about the experience of working in rural Ohio and what that was like for you. So I'm really excited to just walk through all of this and hear. And it sounds like when we had talked before, you really liked the way you started out your professional training and experience, and that felt like a unique way of pursuing that.
Yes, I think it was, and most people today don't get to do anything like that, I think. I got my master's degree in 1966, and when I was in town dealing with my thesis, I ran into Dr. Don Warden, who was the chief psychologist at Athens State Mental Hospital at the time, and he and I had known each other earlier, and I had done some work with him one summer doing testing at Gallipolis State Institute, which was supposed to be a home for the retarded, but they had a lot of people placed there because they were epileptic.
Oh my.
And in the early 60s, they were going in and doing intelligence testing on people to find out if they were in fact retarded. And I was one of the people that would go down there and give tests.
Wow.
And I earned money doing that, and it was great fun, actually, and I ran into quite a number of people who were not in fact retarded. Some were maybe 80s, 90s, or something like that, but really didn't have to be in an institution for the retarded. So anyway, Don knew me from that. He heard that I had gotten my master's degree. OU at that time didn't have a PhD program. They were just on the verge of getting a PhD program. And he said, "Oh, do you want a job?"
How nice.
And I said, "Yeah." And so I started working at the mental hospital. Well, one of the perks working there for the state was that I could take one course a quarter at the university free.
Fantastic.
And so I started immediately taking courses toward my PhD, one course a quarter.
Very nice.
While working at the mental hospital. And we had a good relationship with the department. They sent consultants to the psychology department at the hospital. Dr. Marvin Kahn would come up once a week, interview some patient, maybe give them a Rorschach, and then discuss with us the results of everything, and it was just marvelous training. So I was getting that at the same time that I was taking courses.
That is fantastic.
And so as I took courses and was studying about paranoid schizophrenia, I could relate to paranoid schizophrenics that I knew at the hospital. And so it was really a great way of getting the training. I eventually decided I'd better move ahead a little faster and started taking more than one course a quarter, but that's how I started out on my PhD after my master's.
That's fantastic. And it sounds like you were also one of the first classes in the PhD program from OU?
Probably fairly early, yeah. I think several others had graduated before me, but yeah.
Oh, that's...
I got my actual degree in 1973, so I had gotten my master's in 66 and didn't get my PhD till 73, but I had lots of experience during that time.
Yes. And then it sounds like you went out of state for your internship?
Yes, my internship was in 71,
Okay.
72, somewhere in there, at Shands Teaching Hospital in Gainesville at the University of Florida. So I did 6 months at the teaching hospital and then 6 months in their community mental health clinic in Florida.
Okay. And then came back here to finish your PhD work?
Yeah, to finish my dissertation.
Okay.
And once I got that and graduated, I don't know, I guess they must have had that 1 year of supervised experience that you had to have. I can't remember that. I don't remember that being part of it, but I think I probably did have a year of supervised experience. I don't know when that was supposed to. I don't know when that was supposed to come, but at any rate, I got my license. I was grandfathered in 73 because I already had enough qualifying time and so on with my master's degree. I was licensed in March and got the actual degree in June.
Okay. And so you were licensed in 73, and when did the original licensing law
It
go
was
into
in
effect?
73.
Wow.
So my license number is 597. It's
Fantastic.
fairly early in the sequence.
Fantastic. Okay. And then you stayed in the Athens area to practice?
Right. My husband is from the Athens area. I was, I had lots of contacts here. I pieced together jobs by working at several community mental health centers throughout the area. I would go to Pomeroy 1 day a week and Gallipolis 1 day a week and Parkersburg 1 day a week and things like that. So, and
so what was that like working in these rural outposts in a sense?
Well, it was kind of fun. I felt a little bit uneasy about the fact that I was already the most experienced person around, and I had just gotten my PhD, so I didn't. So I would have welcomed having more mentoring and so on along the way, but I did have some with Jim Webb, who was my dissertation advisor, and he encouraged me, of course, immediately to get involved in OPA, and then he left to be part of the new school at Wright State whenever that started.
Well, and Jim Webb
but Jim and I rode together to Parkersburg often because he also consulted there at the same clinic that I worked at there.
Wonderful, wonderful. And at that point in time, what professions made up the mental health centers?
There were psychologists, there were social workers, there were what they called mental health technicians. They were training people in mental health tech. And that was like a 2-year community mental health at a community college, just a 2-year degree.
Okay, and it sounds like they
Not even a bachelor's, just a 2-year mental health tech.
Associates.
So I don't know whatever happened to that whole profession, but for a while that was prominent.
And did they have any psychiatry coming and consulting or any medical?
I'm sure they did have some psychiatrists, but psychiatrists were not really so prominent in the community mental health movement.
Okay.
They had just started enacting this community mental health centers, hoping to be able to manage a lot of people that were being dumped out of the mental hospitals.
Okay. And so did you come across any of the people that you had tested in, I'm not going to pronounce it right, Gallipolis or?
No, not really. I don't know how people made it to those community mental health centers, but people did, and so you were just doing testing and outpatient therapy. I was doing all ages of people at that time. Eventually settled into only doing adults, but I was evaluating and treating kids and families and
Wow.
and adults.
Wow. And so when did you take Jim Webb's suggestion to join OPA?
I am not sure, but I think that I was first on the OPA board in the 70s, late 70s.
Okay.
So
Okay.
I remember that Dave Rogers was president at the time I first served on the board. We had at that time a Southeast Ohio regional association, but it was really hard to keep together and it faded pretty quickly. But yeah, I was a representative from that association to the OPA board in '76.
Okay.
So that was my first involvement with the OPA board.
And what do you suppose made it hard for that Southeast Association to continue?
I think maybe the ruralness of this area.
Okay.
I don't know. I mean, you couldn't get people from, as you could see driving in here, there weren't good roads. The roads are very curvy, and it was hard to get people to come anywhere to have a meeting.
Yes.
And so you would only have basically people from Athens. And there weren't that many practitioners. As I recall, when I was first in graduate school, they looked on private practice as almost an evil thing to do. That you weren't in it to make lots of money. You were in it to serve the public.
Oh, I see.
And you should work in community mental health or mental hospitals or something like that.
I see. And so at that time, private practices were making lots of money?
Well, I think they thought they were. I don't know.
Oh, that's very interesting. And at that time, what was the gender mix in psychology?
Oh, I don't know.
Did there?
I mean, I knew both women and men in practice, but I suppose there were more men than women.
Okay. Okay.
Certainly at that time there were more men than women.
And so was you were one of the originators of Ohio Women in Psychology, weren't you?
Yeah, I was in the first group of women that got together and I think Seth Zimmerman may have been the first president.
Okay.
I'm not sure. I think Joanne King was president of OPA at the time, and she wanted to get something going for women because most of the decisions being made were male decisions at the time.
Okay.
And even though she got to be president, she thought that we needed more programming that in the educational programs that were offered through OPA and so on, that needed to be more aware of women's issues. So
Wonderful.
yeah.
Wonderful. And so you were working in various mental health centers, and you had gotten involved.
And I was in a small private practice with several other psychologists. I think I was the only woman in that little practice. Jim Webb was one of the people in that, and several others. And so he started out very small in, a few clients a week.
Uh-huh.
Now I'm back to the same thing. Yeah, eventually.
It's nice that it comes full circle.
Right.
And so you had some involvement with, as a board member of the Ohio Psychological Association, you had some involvement with the Ohio Licensing Board.
Yeah, eventually I did, and I'm not sure when that started, but I know I started serving as kind of a liaison between OPA and the board, and I don't know when that happened exactly. I have in my vita that it was after my presidential year, but I must have had more contact with them before that, because I know of some involvement I had with the issue of the board wanting to set up some guidelines for evaluations being done with when there were forensic evaluations about child sexual abuse.
Okay.
Often in custody cases and so on, that this would come up. And there were some pretty shaky practices being done, and I know the board of psychology was interested in having some kind of way to judge whether people were doing it right. And I believe that was maybe during either the year before I became president or my presidential year. And Barb Garwood was the chair of or president of the state board, and she wrote up some guidelines. And she was one to take the bull by the horns and do things. And we got wind of it at OPA and tried to put the brakes on that a little bit, because we thought that really the board shouldn't be making up guidelines for how practice should be done, that should be done by professional organizations and by more than one person. And so Dick Reinierson and I were instrumental, I think, in getting a group together of real experts throughout the state to look at the guidelines she had written and rewrite them and come up with something that, and we persuaded them to reference guidelines that were written by OPA.
Okay.
So they could use those in making decisions, but they wouldn't be writing them up, just like they don't write up an ethics code. That's done by the professional organizations.
And so at that time, was there a lot of empirical data related to interviewing children and adolescents
Well,
about
a
sexual
lot of the
abuse?
people that we had on that committee were very well aware of the kinds of problems you could have with suggestive questioning and things like that. And we had Barbara Boat from Cincinnati who was in that group, and I can't remember who from Nationwide Children's Hospital in Columbus. And we had a number of really high-powered people
Yes.
that we got together to come up with those guidelines,
That's wonderful.
and then got them through, approved by the OPA board, I think the year I was president. And we published them in the Ohio Psychologist.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Now, I don't know that they're so aware of those anymore, because when I got on the state board eventually in the year about 2000, when we had some cases that involved things like that, I said, well, OPA had guidelines on that, and they were struggling to find any, and so I found my old copy
Oh,
of
good.
them and gave them to them. But I don't know what happened to the filing system
Well,
for
that,
but
that sounds like that would be
Yeah.
something to revisit and
Yeah.
make sure we have in our archives also. Very interesting. And so you went from being a liaison from your regional association and
eventually got on the board. I don't remember if I got on as ethics chair. The next time I served on the board, it was a number of years later. But I know I was chair of the ethics department, maybe just a member of the committee, and then chair for a number of years.
And I understand that the ethics committee at that time had very different responsibilities than they do
Right.
currently. And can you speak a little bit to
Yeah.
that job?
Well, that was really fun. I mean, I found it really interesting. We would get complaints from consumers directed to the ethics committee, and the ethics committee would investigate them.
Oh my.
We investigated, we gathered information, we made decisions about whether to say that, no, the psychologist did a fine job, they did what they were supposed to do, or maybe reprimand them, or in very rare cases, I think we would recommend that they lose their license or something, but
And so it sounds like at that time the
we were doing
licensing
an
board really
investigative job.
didn't do that. That was something that was the job of OPA's
Well, ethics committee, the state board, of course, would decide about licenses too, and I don't know how they were dealing with complaints, but there were two routes, I think, for people to
Interesting.
have complaints addressed. And we actually thought of our job partly as an educational job for the psychologists, and to tell them, if we issued a reprimand, it wasn't because we thought they were egregiously wrong. We just thought, you need to know and clean up your act. You need to not be doing this. And then as managed care took over more and more and required people to answer questions like, have you ever been investigated by an ethics committee, or have you ever received any punishment? And then they wouldn't be allowed to practice on the panel. And we thought, wait a minute, that isn't what we wanted to have happen.
Yes.
we didn't want these psychologists to not be able to practice because they slipped up in some way on some technicality almost in the ethics code. You know, some things we think of as more egregious than others. Like having sex with your patient is more egregious than some of the other things that might have come up. And we just didn't want that to be happening, and eventually decided, and I think it was again during my year as president, that decision was finally made by the board to stop adjudicating complaints and reconstitute the ethics committee as a consulting committee.
Okay. And so did you continue on the ethics committee once it became a consulting committee?
Maybe. I can't remember.
I'm just curious.
I have to check my cheat sheet.
That's fine. And I was curious about how that shift felt.
I don't think I did.
Okay.
I have down here that after I was president, I became a liaison to the state board, and also a co-editor, and then finally editor of the Ohio Psychologist.
Okay.
So I think, well, here I do have down that I was on the peer review committee and served as a chair from 2000 to 2001. So I don't know. It's all a little unclear to me after all this time. And then I got appointed to the state board in 2001 and stopped being chair. But I went back and did another term as chair.
Okay.
From 2000 to 2001.
When the ethics committee was adjudicating complaints, how was that received by psychologists in Ohio?
Well, some of them were upset. They didn't like being told they were bad, in some way. But many were very cooperative and really wanted to, get back on track.
Well, that's nice to hear, and that would be a very difficult role, I would think, to be judging your colleagues in certain ways, appropriate ways, but being heavy in those cases.
Right.
Very interesting. And so, what led you to be interested in being considered for the licensing board?
Well, I know I had served as a liaison to the board and was seeing a lot of contentiousness on the board at that time. A lot of people kind of mistreating each other, I thought.
Okay.
I'm not sure when OPA began making recommendations to the governor's office about who should serve on the board, but I think the OPA began to be concerned that a lot of the people that were appointed were maybe kind of political appointments of some sort or something, and were not necessarily representing the best and brightest of our profession, and began making recommendations about who would serve on the board. And I think that started before I was president, that they started making some overtures to make recommendations, and they are generally pretty well received now by the governor's offices. They tend to, occasionally they'll select somebody that wasn't recommended by OPA, but most of the people that are serving now, I think, have been recommended by OPA, even the consumer members.
Wonderful, wonderful. And so when you entered onto the Ohio Licensing Board, was the contentious mix still there, or was that beginning to...
That was beginning to fade, and also I think that was just about the same time that Ron Ross became executive director.
Okay.
I think I had known some of the investigators for the state board from my contacts with the state board, and I think my opinion was pretty well respected by those investigators and so on, and I think they were still on board when Ron became executive director, and eventually all of them have left since then, and new ones have been hired. But so I think it was less contentious by the time I got on the board, and basically the time that I served on the board, it was very cooperative board, respectful. Even if we disagreed with each other, it was in a respectful way. And we also started under Ron to have more almost committees to make big decisions, so that it wasn't just the board members. Because I had always felt that that was kind of dangerous. I mean, you just had 9 people and 9 fine people, but they may not be experts in the areas that they were trying to address. And so by the time we were coming up with new rules for how to have psychologists get credit for time before their PhD, Ron got together a great group of training directors from the universities and so on to help come up with what are the appropriate rules for acceptable hours for supervised hours. You didn't want the very first case you've ever had to count as hours toward your supervised hours for licensure. You know, you want those to be things that happened later in your career when you really had more experience and were really getting good supervision. And so how did you sequence that? And so we worked out rules that were pretty well accepted by all of the constituencies.
And that's not easy to do.
No. I don't know if you're seeing my cat here in the picture, but my cat has joined me here. This is Bella, one of our 3 cats.
And Bella is truly beautiful. It's always nice to have a little help with your interviews.
Right.
So. Well, and before I jump in too much about your experience on the licensing board, I suppose I should step back and ask about your memories and accomplishments and feelings about your presidency for the Ohio Psychological Association.
Yeah, well, I was actually very surprised that I got elected. I wasn't the one who was supposed to be elected that year. They usually tried to find another person to run. Somebody, and And I think I surprised everybody by winning. But I think the reason I won was the constituency of the Ohio Women in Psychology.
Aha. Okay.
Because by then there were a lot of people in that organization, and they knew me and apparently liked me enough that they voted for me. So.
Oh, that's great.
That's why I think I won that presidential year.
So I guess a little demonstration of that woman power.
Right.
And so it sounds like the Ohio Women in Psychology was a pretty enthusiastic.
Yes, it was really much more of a force than it is now. Probably has less reason for needing to be now than it did at that time. But it was a pretty robust organization, and for a while there were evening meetings of the Ohio Women in Psychology the night before the convention. And we would have dinner meetings and speakers and get really good attendance for those, and we had a lot of fun. And eventually, OPA sort of expanded around us and took over those dinner meetings.
Okay. And incorporated some of those presentations into their regular convention.
Right.
Yeah. Fantastic. So you were successful in your goal of having them include more about women's issues and
right, and have a little bit more chances for experiential type offerings.
Nice.
Not just lecture, but I remember one year we had somebody come in and teach the first step of Reiki treatment as a CE offering. And
so definitely hands-on.
Definitely hands-on.
That's very interesting, and it seems
and we
like
had an art therapy thing once, and various.
So yeah, the experiential. I didn't realize that was also a focus of Ohio Women in Psychology. That's really interesting.
We wanted to have some things where you got a chance to do more than hear somebody or look at PowerPoint.
That's good. And in a sense, it sounds like that aspect has been taken up by the spirituality retreat that they have every February now.
Yeah, that might be.
That's interesting.
So some of these things are beginning to bloom.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think it's really wonderful that all of you are still involved in Ohio Women in Psychology, because that...
Yeah, there was a core group that just became great friends because of that. So, and most of us are wanting to move out of the picture and have younger people take it over. But it's been kind of a struggle. It's always hard for an organization that doesn't have an office or a staff or whatever to keep going. It just is.
Yes, and especially when there isn't the drive that you had when women's issues weren't included, and now that they are being included, there's a bit of an identity thing, I would imagine.
Right.
So OWP was helpful in landing you the position of president maybe a year or two before you were prepared or ready to take it on.
But I always am doing things before I'm prepared, So.
And so what would you say were the personal highlights of your experience during being president-elect, past president?
Well, I really liked working on that thing about the guidelines. We also worked on trying to get better communications going within the board to send out information prior to the board meetings, have people write up reports before the board meetings so people would come prepared and things like that. We were working on getting better procedures.
And that continues.
And that continues. I mean, you're always struggling with that.
Oh, that's...
And how do we get these meetings to be efficient? And
Wonderful. And it sounds like that would have been around the time that the PsyD program at Wright State was...
Yeah, I can't remember when they started. They were already up and running, I think, by that time. This was in...
Yeah.
It was in 95 that I was president.
Okay, yeah. I graduated in 88 from SOPP and started in 84, and I believe there were 4 or 5 classes ahead of me. So, yeah, I guess that... So there wouldn't have been a big shift that would have affected you as
It wasn't
president.
a big shift at that point. Yeah, so that must have happened in the early 80s or something like that.
Yeah. Okay. Very interesting. But you had involvement from all of those people who were associated with the School of Psychology and also APA. And I think OPA, even at that time, was very strongly connected to APA. And
Right.
were there things that during your work on the board that you were aware of that OPA and APA were doing together? And this is just kind of a trick question. So.
Yeah, it's a trick question. Well,
it just occurred to me that.
Yeah, we were.
I know Jim Webb and Ron Fox, and they were involved in OPA and also.
They had been
APA.
Before I was involved so much.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Trying to see here if I've got something about APA. I have a legislative and regulatory things that we were interested in at that time. Tort reform was passed with inclusion of psychology in the statute of limitations.
And what does that mean?
Well, it had to do with how long after an event people could sue you.
Okay.
You know? And the psychologists weren't included in that list of professions that, you only had like 2 years or something to bring up a suit.
I see.
And psychologists got included at that time.
And are those time periods still pretty solid, or have those changed?
Yeah, I think so. Except when it's something like sex abuse, I think that's one where
it's a longer period.
It's a longer period, but
okay.
For most things, you can't keep bringing things up, 10 years after the case, and after you would have destroyed your records, and so on. So,
Okay.
So that was one of the things, and we participated when Bureau of Workmen's Compensation was being restructured. We met with Nationwide, the administrator of the Medicare program. We met with the Attorney General regarding her opinion, which we were very sorry that this had been asked of the Attorney General, because she decided that counselors could do psychological testing, because psychological is just anything that's psychological.
Oh my.
So that still stands, that ruling. So they can have on their reports psychological testing.
Interesting.
Yeah. And we tried to get her to backpedal on that, but did not succeed at that.
Is that interesting? And so when you say counselors, counseling psychologists, or
No,
just
counselors.
any kind of mental health counselor?
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
Huh. That doesn't even make sense to me, because
I know.
you can't call yourself a psychologist unless
Right.
you're licensed
But
in
the-
psychology. That's so interesting.
Yes.
Okay.
It was something that was upsetting. Usually, and I don't remember if it was the state board or maybe it was the counselor board that asked for that opinion.
Mm-hmm.
You have to be real careful when you ask for an official opinion from the Attorney General's office, that you know what you're going to get.
Yeah. That is really interesting. I had no idea. Now, is the Attorney General still able to make decisions about professions?
Yes. If they're asked for an opinion.
That's good to know.
You try not to ask them for opinions.
Right. Very interesting. So it sounds like your era with during your involvement on the board really was focused on getting psychology more organized in terms of being a profession, rather than a group of people who were doing psychological things. The licensing law had come into being, and
Well, that had come in the 70s. So, OPA was working on all that stuff for years, but in the mid 90s, I think, was when managed care was really taking hold.
Okay.
And so you were fighting all kinds of battles with managed care, and a lot of that has died down. At first, they micromanaged everything. You had to send them detailed reports of all your therapy and everything like that, and they would determine whether you could see them longer. And,
my.
Now it tends to be pretty routine, maybe a one-page checklist,
So they were dictating the profession in a sense at that
in a way
point.
they were dictating the
Interesting.
profession, and so we were constantly fighting that kind of thing.
Yes. Wow, that sounds exhausting.
Yeah.
So moving on to your experience on the licensing board, are there things that come to mind that you really are very memorable to you? Things that you really enjoyed being a part of?
Well, at first we were doing a lot of hearings, and that isn't done so much anymore. More often now, people sign consent agreements. They work out, they will admit to this, this, and this, and the board will offer this punishment, and you kind of negotiate it, what will be said in the consent agreement.
So early on, the hearings were happening more often because there wasn't that consent agreement option?
That option was there, but I'm not sure exactly. There was a huge backlog of cases.
Oh my, okay.
And it seemed like it was really hard to get the investigation done without actually having a hearing and having people come in and testify, and the person complaining would have to come in and testify and have witnesses, and the other side the psychologist would have witnesses. Must have cost a fortune to do that.
For everybody,
Yeah, for everybody.
And how long
some
would a
of those-
hearing take?
Sometimes days.
My goodness. And so if you were on the licensing board, well, when you were on the licensing board
So
during
you
that
would
time, you were gone from your practice for
Right.
days.
Yeah.
Wow. Wow. That was quite a contribution to your profession to be on the board.
Right. Well, we got paid.
Okay. Okay.
But not a fortune. I think
Yeah.
it was maybe close to $20 an hour.
Okay.
But
Certainly not what you were making in your practice, but still
Yeah.
to balance it a little bit.
Yeah. Oh, now Bertie has appeared.
Oh.
So he's decided that you're safe.
Oh, good.
Bertie is our cat that is a little less brave than Bella.
Well, he's checking
She's
out
the tiny one. He's the big, husky-looking cat, and he's generally a little...
Well, they're beautiful cats. Yeah, he's going to check out the tripod before he gets anywhere close to me or you.
Right.
Wow. So hearings
Those hearings were really interesting.
Yes.
And I did find it interesting to realize the kinds of things psychologists were doing that it was hard to believe.
Were there different things that were coming up then than came up later in your tenure on the licensing board?
I think there were a lot of sexual abuse things. I think we got that. We got in some ways to address those more quickly, on more of an emergency basis.
Oh, good.
And another thing that the state board started doing was doing kind of joint meetings at OPA where we would bring in information to OPA about these are the kinds of complaints we're getting. Here are some vignettes of actual cases that we have dealt with, what do you think? And, getting
Nice.
people to work on that in CE offerings. So was a lot more of the ethics committee and the board of psychology together making some presentations with vignettes that were from actual cases so people could see the kinds of things that were happening.
Yes. And I think
that's probably helped.
I agree. And I know in my graduate program at the Wright State School of Psychology, there was a lot of focus on educating around ethics and those kinds of vignettes and things. Do you think that became more commonly taught in other PhD programs?
I would guess that eventually it did, yeah.
That's quite an important impact.
Yeah.
I'm glad that you were doing that. So sounds like the hearings became more streamlined and actually avoiding hearings and being able to negotiate and really focus on what the issues were that needed to be worked on. Any other things while you were on the board that were...
I think we got better and better at doing the investigations too. I was sometimes amazed at the kinds of things our investigators could turn up.
Aha!
Because we didn't even have subpoena power, so,
boy.
So we would... I don't know, they managed to turn up all kinds of factual information.
Very interesting.
I think we've also encouraged the universities to pay more attention to this sort of thing and their responsibility to weed people out. One of the early sexual abuse cases that we had, we found out that this guy had been in trouble during his internship. He had been in trouble a number of times and nobody had kicked him out.
Oh, wow. That's a little terrifying.
So I think that these universities were sometimes pretty lax in really making sure that some people just didn't even get a license in the first place.
Now, do you think that higher rate of, or seemingly higher rate of sexual abuse or sexual activity by psychologists at that time had anything to do with boundaries shifting within the profession? I mean, were we looser before that, or were we more?
I don't know. I mean, I didn't get on the board until 2001, so it was from then to 2010 was when I was on the state board. So I don't know what would have been going on.
That's interesting. I do remember going to APA as it would have been, I think, after I had graduated, so it would have been late 80s, early 90s, and having some of the well-known psychologists talking about their frustration with the profession getting uptight in a sense, and not allowing certain things that they felt were therapeutic.
Okay. That's right.
But they really were more what you would do for a friend. Yeah.
Well, there was some interesting data at one point that a bigger proportion of people who got in trouble had graduated from programs that were more touchy-feely type programs.
Oh, interesting.
The Gestalt kind of stuff that was very popular for a while and could easily be misused as well as used appropriately. And I think a lot of people have real trouble figuring out when is it a misuse and when is this appropriate. So maybe being tougher on it and saying, you should only touch clients in the rarest of circumstances, and and even discuss that with them and why you're not doing it.
Yes. Well, I
think has some merit.
Absolutely, and I would have to say that it sounds like you've been involved in that kind of movement throughout, and starting with the ethics committee on the Ohio Psychological Association, and just redefining what's reasonable physical boundaries, and how to educate, like you said, the psychologists and in training, so that becomes a way that we think about things instead of bumbling into a big mistake.
Right. And getting into a situation where you feel uncomfortable enough that you don't even consult with another psychologist because you suspect that there's something wrong with it. And I think that happens to people.
I bet. So now that you've come full circle and you're working a small private practice, tell me about what your private practice is like now.
Well, I'm really pretty much retired. I only see clients one day a week.
Nice.
And it works out very nicely because I'm in a building with a bunch of other therapists. We're not all psychologists. There are some counselors, but we share a secretary, administrative assistant extraordinaire, and if she ever retires, I'm out, because she knows how to talk to insurance companies and and get us paid and
Oh, that's wonderful.
all this stuff. And I see complaints on the listserv all the time with people having difficulties that she just does not seem to have. So,
That's wonderful. Maybe she
yeah.
could do some training at a fall convention.
Yeah, right.
That's what, and you don't have to travel from site to site. You
No,
can have
I
one
just
place
go
to go.
in one day a week and share office space with another person who. It had been my office forever, and so it's still got my furniture and my stuff in it, and I'm trying to weed out stuff so that she has room in file cabinets and things like that. Yeah. So.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah.
That's really nice. Well, is there anything that I haven't asked you about that I should have and you would like to talk about?
I don't know. Can't think of anything in particular right now.
Well, this has been delightful, and I just am so impressed by everything that you have done and given to our profession and helped us grow up healthier.
I suppose the only other thing, going back even further in time, is how did I ever get into the field in the first place? Because that was at the time that I was growing up, there were 3 jobs women could do. You could be a teacher, you could be a nurse, or you could be a secretary. I mean, that's the way I saw the world at that time.
Well, I think that's the way we were taught to see the world.
Yeah. And fortunately, my dad didn't have any sons, and and he was persuaded to send me to college by some people that were in my youth group in church, and they got me sent to college. But Dad was really a pretty wise man, and he had various sayings, and one of them was, "The world doesn't owe you a living." And I thought, great, that means I can have my own living. I don't need to have a man to give me a living.
Nice.
I mean, that's the way I interpreted that.
Sure.
I'm not sure that's how he meant it. But so I wanted to work, but I didn't want to do any of those things. I didn't want to teach. I knew I didn't want to teach. I was very shy. I didn't like speaking in public at all. And I certainly didn't want to be a secretary, even though I could take shorthand and type. I learned those things. Tried to keep that secret. So I went to college and I had to choose a major. And most of the things I was interested in, I thought I would have to teach if I majored in them. I didn't think I could be a good enough writer to make a living writing, so if I went into English, I'd have to teach it. And if the same with art, just various things that I was interested in. But I was interested in psychology, and so I decided to major in psychology because I figured you could do more with that than teach it.
Absolutely.
So I went ahead and majored in psychology, and as I was nearing the end of my college career, where I was doing very well, my advisor said, if you really want to have a job in psychology, you'll have to go to graduate school. Oh, I didn't know that. Okay. So I'll apply to graduate school.
Excellent.
So this is how I ended up in psychology.
That is
and I applied to 3 graduate schools in Ohio and got accepted at them all and decided on OU because they offered me the most money.
Fantastic. And so you had mentoring, it sounds like, from a male faculty person.
Yeah.
As a bachelor's student.
Yes.
And,
he only had a master's degree himself, but his name was Leon Wise, and he was wise. And I remember telling him once I wasn't sure that I wanted to be a therapist. I wasn't sure I liked people that much. He said, "Well, you can always go into experimental, and, and all that." And I decided, no, that isn't what I want to do. I'm more interested in people. I don't want to run rats, So, it just, got me thinking about things and said, I really needed to go to graduate school. And so, just...
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
And how was your father feeling about having a daughter who had her doctorate?
I'm not sure that my parents ever really understood it.
Oh, okay.
It was good because it sounded impressive, I guess, to have a doctorate, but I don't think they really understood what it involved.
Okay.
Or really what I was doing.
Yeah. I think psychology is a difficult profession to describe to outsiders.
Yes, it is. In fact, when I was younger and early in my career, if I would meet people out in public and would say that I was a psychologist, they would all clam up, or they would say, "Oh, you're analyzing me," or something like that, So,
did you find you had to create a new career in those circumstances?
Well, I didn't say much about it. I didn't talk about other topics.
Oh. Very interesting.
Yeah. And now it's much easier. It's
yes.
You don't get that kind of reaction so much anymore, but it really was prominent. And practically anybody, they would just be scared.
Mm-hmm. And I think you're right. Our profession was very mysterious at that time. We had ink blots and things that weren't that commonsensical or direct in people's minds. But I think we've done a good job of educating the public and to say that it's not a scary thing.
Right.
It can be a very helpful thing.
Right. Yeah. So when I went in to have my cataract surgery on Thursday, the nurse saw my name and she said, "Are you a counselor?" And I said, "Yeah, I do that." And she said, "I think my sister saw you." And you helped her a lot.
Oh, so that's wonderful.
Well, isn't that wonderful?
That is. Well, I think you've helped more than her sister. I think you've helped a lot of people on a lot of different levels. And
well, I hope so.
It's been a pleasure
spending
time with you and interviewing you, and I thank you for your time.
You're welcome.
We'll see if I can turn this off.